for development of EDRR capacity. And I got to tell you, in working on invasive species over the past 34 years, starting as a port inspector for APHIS in Charleston, South Carolina, I can tell you that we really have to work together to deal with this problem. It is a global problem. And we're talking about the second line of defense, which is early detection and rapid response in this particular webinar series. This is the second session in which we're going to talk about partnerships. The third session, which comes next week, we're talking about developing early detection capacity through networks and forensic parks, things like that. And then the fourth session is rapid assessment, and we wrap it up on February 26th with rapid response. Now, starting Thursday, I'd like for you to think about joining us for a weekly 9-part webinar series on invasive species prevention. And this is based on a workshop Steve and I did for the Global Invasive Species Program over in Tanzania in Africa in 2006. And so we have 9 parts to this series, which talks about exclusion at ports of entry. And so that's really the first line of defense. So if you put those two things together, we're really thinking about everything that is being done or could be done or should be done to prevent the introduction and spread of new invasive species. So to start off today, I wanted you to write down 2 numbers, okay? According to Rod Randall, who is our good friend and weed geographer with the Western Australia Department of Agriculture in Perth, Western Australia, in his global compendium of weeds, which you can actually get a free copy of as a PDF file if you want one, he so far this year has documented 33,759 species of weeds in the world. That's a big number. That's all over the world and everything, all the countries of the world. But the other figure I want you to think about here as I'm talking today is 1,300. According to John Cortez at the Biota of North America program here in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, we have about 1,300 species of introduced weeds in the United States. Now, there are a lot more plants here that are introduced from other countries outside of cultivation, which have not really been documented as weeds, but there's 1,300 that have become pretty big problems, like kudzu, giant salvinia, and there's crested floating heart, which is down at Lake Marion in South Carolina, where they have 6,000 acres of this plant, and it's one boat ride away from here at Lake Waccamaw in southeastern North Carolina. So 6,000 acres sitting, waiting for a boat to take it anywhere. So look at those 2 numbers, put that into your mind, and think about what are we going to do to make sure that we don't get to 15,000 weeds in the United States. Because unless we make some changes in the way we introduce plants and animals into this country, and unless we have capacity to detect things that escape from cultivation and domestication as it relates to animals, we're going to have a much, much bigger problem in the future. And that's really what these seminar series, this is what it's all about, is to make sure that we don't have many more than 1,300 species that are problems in the United States. So just keep those figures in mind. I started work, if you have seen the overview webinar for EDRR, which is Steve recorded last week and is posted on the IPC website. Started my career as a port inspector, as I said, in Charleston, South Carolina, and then moved in 1979 and moved up here in 1986 to work with Dr. Bob Epley in the witchweed eradication program, and for the next 15 years really worked on what we call EDRR 1.0, which is federal and state weed eradication programs. These are single agency-led programs, generally regulated species, regulated by the state or regulated by the federal government, by APHIS. And examples of those include goat shrew, where we had 40,000 acres we were trying to eradicate in Utah, in Cache County, and Japanese daughter, which infested the Arboretum up at Clemson University. And so these are examples of EDRR 1.0, and this is really where we got our start in the modern weed control era after World War II in weed prevention. In 1998, I met Steve Manning and some other folks, and we began to think about how we could improve our approaches to invasive species prevention. And one thing that was really clear was that so many people changed in agencies, and the priorities changed over the years, that you really needed more people working on a problem like goat's true in Utah than one agency, than, say, Utah State University. So we started encouraging folks to develop state invasive species councils, starting with the Delaware Invasive Species Council that Lee Patrick helped us with IPC, helped us establish in August 1998, and the Wyoming Weed Team, which Steve Manning of IPC helped us establish in June of 1998. And then a little bit later, we started actually working in task forces on specific problems like beach phytex here in the Carolinas. And you can look up these websites for these task forces and councils and find out what they're doing now. Very successful. We call that EDRR 2.0. Now, when I retired last year, Steve Manning suggested that we might take the ideas we had developed for EDRR 1.0 and 2.0 and apply them at all levels of the landscape. And this is where it relates to you, because I've given so many presentations on this topic. And I go to some place like North Dakota, and people sit and they really like this. But I came to realize in talking to Steve last year that it's fine for somebody in a national park in North Dakota to hear this, but they say, how does this relate to me? And so over the past about 9 months, Steve and I have been trying to take our ideas from the last 20 years and to develop new approaches that you can employ on any land unit, anywhere, at any level of the landscape, all the way from the national level down to a farm, a park, a forest, a refuge, farms, ranches, preserves, and even your own backyard. So that's just really what we mean by EDRR 3.0, is developing EDRR capacity, so that in 50 years, this number, the number 1,300, will not be much bigger. Because if we don't do this, I can tell you that in 100 years, we may have 5,000 weeds in this country that are really bad, like kudzu. I really have no doubt, because I've worked in the port of entry, and I've done weed eradication programs over these years. And unless people take responsibility for the lands they own or manage, we're going to have much bigger problems in the future. And that's what EDRR is really all about, the landscape approach to it. Getting people to take this responsibility in a way similar to the Aldo Leopold idea of land conservation, if you've read Sand County Almanac. I really enjoyed reading that when I was in college in my ecology classes, but it's especially meaningful now, and where he's trying to get people to look at the land that they own or manage and just take care of it. And the one thing we need to do to get people to take care of things is not just worry about regulated species like hydrilla, but think about something that's brand new on my land. This is my kingdom. If it's kudzu for the first time, it's just as bad as hydrilla or giant salvinia. So the question is, where do you fit in this picture? Now, before I get started with partnerships, I want you to see how it fits in the bigger picture here. The bigger picture of invasive species in terms of developing EDRR capacity, and there's really 7 steps to developing EDRR capacity. And it doesn't matter where you're talking to Rick Iverson in North Carolina for the whole state, to Bob Parsons in Park County, Wyoming for his county, for Stanley Jones in Otto, Wyoming for his ranch. So we're talking about here about getting organized, identifying your stakeholders, developing a plan, putting more eyes on the ground, the way Les Meerhoff did with the Invasive Plant Atlas of New England, doing surveys of all these resources you have, submitting field data to University of Georgia EdMaps or other online databases like that through your iPhones and Android phone apps. Managing your field data and projects with IPC smart tools like IPC Connect, IPC Logic, and IPC Prevent. Then reporting new things like crested floating heart there to people like Rick Iverson in Raleigh. If you think this is something, especially if it's a regulated species like Kogon grass or these plants that are regulated, the folks in your states need to know about it. Assess the problem, decide what you ought to do, and actually do something. So now this is what I covered last week in the overview presentation in detail. What we're going to do today is look at number one, how you can get organized. And this is something I really enjoy. I really enjoy talking to people about invasive species, getting together or sitting down and figuring out how they can make things work. And by and far, what you have to do more than anything is figure out whose ox is getting gored, if you know what I mean. So a little bit later, we can talk to you about how you can do this, to develop EDRR capacity through an in-house program or with a company like IPC. This is certainly something that we would like to work with you on. Anyway, let's talk about getting organized. First thing, if you've got a problem like beach vitex or here on the coast or giant salvinia or anything like that that's going to impact more than a single landowner or manager, is to identify and engage the stakeholders. And there's two kinds of stakeholders. First of all, there's potential stakeholders, there's impacted stakeholders, first of all. These are people who are having the problem right now. And if you live in a swamp run and part of your property has alligator weed down there, you can't just control it on your property. If the swamp run goes upstream from you, the folks up there have to be involved with the solution, because if you get rid of it on your property, it's just going to come right back downstream on you. So that's what I mean by potential stakeholders. So impacted stakeholders and potential stakeholders, people downstream from you. Get them together and figure out what you want to do and sort of go at it in a community way. And organize these stakeholder meetings and talk about your emerging problems, your big problems, and what you could do. This is exactly what we're doing right now here at Lake Waccamaw in southeastern North Carolina, now that we have found hydrilla. Hydrilla is been found to be in about 600 acres of this 9,000 acre natural lake. And so far, since this was discovered last October, we have had 3 public meetings. A technical advisory committee meeting, a lot of state and local and federal folks got together at Lake Waccamaw to talk about what to do, what not to do, what we can do, what's impractical, how much it's going to cost, etc. And we talked to the Park Advisory Committee, the Lake Waccamaw State Park Advisory Committee on another day. Then we had a public forum. And this coming Friday, we're going to have a Technical Advisory Committee meeting again. Because now that we know it's going to cost $450,000 a year to control this thing, because the Wildlife Resources Commission refuses to allow anybody to use grass carp in this natural lake, we're going to have to figure out where to get about $250,000 per year, because the state is going to allocate about $200,000 a year. And we're going to have to go find through grants or local funding or taxes or whatever another $250,000 a year. And this is going to go on for 10 to 15 years to actually manage and hopefully eradicate this thing. And as I tell you that, I want you to think about the opportunity cost of this. In other words, the money that we're going to spend, because this thing has arrived here and it's something that we could have prevented if we had been looking at this here. Even though I've been talking about EDRR for years, it seems like people don't really get engaged with this as an option until they have the problem. And now they have EDRR religion, if you know what I mean. They're saying, well, how can we make sure we don't get crested floating heart? Well, it's really very simple. We've got to talk to the boaters who come to these lakes all over the South between these boating and fishing tournaments and make sure they understand that they can't spread stuff. They're not really doing it on purpose, except you know, few people are with hydrilla because they think it's better for fishing. But beyond that, it just happens, it's incidental to movement of boats. Once you figure out who these stakeholders are, you need to develop a work plan. The work plan is something that we developed several years ago when we were developing state EDRR systems here in the Carolinas, and as I talked about it around the rest of the country and up in Canada. And the work plan includes a coordinating committee, and that's some of your folks who are directly involved with the issue. And in the case of hydrilla at Lake Waccamaw, it's Lake Waccamaw State Park, the town of Lake Waccamaw, the Wildlife Resources Commission, and the North Carolina Department of Agriculture, NC State, Southeastern Community College, and Invasive Plant Control, among others. So as you can see right here on the screen in front of you, as far as our state EDRR committee, our principal contact for that is Rick Iverson. He's the state weed coordinator up in Raleigh. Margaret Fields is doing our survey and mapping type work for the committee. And we have a number of cooperating botanists who identify weeds for us at NC State and at Chapel Hill. We put our information that we gather in the field into EdMaps, which is at the University of Georgia. Then we have biologists who will do weed risk assessments for us with us, including Rob Richardson at NC State and Rob Emmons at the DNR. Then we have cooperating weed scientists like Rob Richardson, Wayne Batten, and formerly Dr. Bob Epley, who just died last week, who tell us how to control and eradicate these types of invasive species. And you can see there, this is what you need to develop for your own EDRR system, starting with a work plan, EDRR committee. These are the people that are intimately involved with the issue you're talking about. Then you come up with a target list, and in the case of North Carolina, we've got about 28 species, including all the regulated species that are regulated by North Carolina Department of Agriculture, things that we really want to either keep out of the state or eradicate once they get here. And examples include hydrilla and crested floating heart. And locally, our goal is to actually eradicate wild taro, which is elephant ears, from Lake Waccamaw. We obviously are not going to eradicate this ornamental by any means from most places, but we don't want it in this state park. So if we've sort of put the fences up around the state park and said we don't want wild taro here, and if we can get rid of it, we will. If you want to grow it in your yard, fine. We don't want it in the park. That's what I mean by setting your priorities on the land that you manage or own. And think about those high-value resources that you have, whether they're natural or managed, whether they're crops. In the case of Lake Waccamaw, this is the Waccamaw silverside. The Waccamaw silverside is a little minnow that only lives in this lake, in the headwaters of the river, the Waccamaw River, that flows out of the lake down to the coastal plain near the coast, and actually goes into the Atlantic Ocean at Winyaw Bay at Georgetown, South Carolina, not too far north of Charleston. So some examples of great task forces and partnerships that we have formed over the past 10 years in which you can see that having a partnership made the difference in our success. The first one I can tell you about is the Giant Salvinia Task Force, which we formed here in about 2002. And it was state and federal and local folks who got together and said, you know, this is terrible. We don't want Giant Salvinia in North Carolina. What can we do? So we started an effort to eradicate Giant Salvinia from a number of sites, actually down in New Hanover County here, where Wilmington is, Pender County, and on up the coast we had about 6 infestations in the southeastern part of the state. And so this has been a tremendous success. The last infestation is shown here at the Riverbend community in Pender County. And This is what it looked like in 2002, and that's what it looked like in 2006, Giant Salvinia Task Force. So as far as we know, there's no more Giant Salvinia in North Carolina because of this task force. The other one I want to mention to you that I'm really very proud of as well is the Beach Vitex Task Force. And I first heard about this plant in 1998 when a fellow named Tommy Sosha from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers called me and said, we have this plant down here around Charleston up to Georgetown that NC State Arboretum suggested people put out on their dunes really more like a flower or a ornamental plant in the late 80s, early 90s, and it's just allowing lots of dune erosion. And so what happened was nothing. So I told this about this plant to the folks in D.C. It was brand new, and they said, well, who besides you and the guy from the Corps of Engineers cares about this plant? And I couldn't really say because nobody had stepped up and said, what are you going to do about this plant? Well, it was in 2003 that the lady that is shown here with this sea turtle right there, Betsy Bradson, she called me in the fall of 2003 and she said, we have this plant down here that is causing lots of problems, lots of dune erosion. She's a sea turtle volunteer, by the way. And I understand that you might be able to help us get organized to do something because I've talked to Clemson and I've talked to the Department of Agriculture and I've talked to the DNR, and none of them seem like they know what to do about this because they say, well, it's not a crop weed and it's not an aquatic weed, and so what can we do? And so I said, well, first thing you've got to do is get all the impacted and the other stakeholders together, the potential stakeholders, and talk about it and figure out, can anything be done? Because sometimes, folks, it's not going to be done. Things are not going to be done because you can't get enough stakeholders to agree on what you should do. So we got together that fall and formed a task force. And if you want to find out more about what's happened over the past 10 years, go to the Beach Vitex Task Force. I am really excited to tell you that it's almost all eradicated from the coast of South Carolina. We have a group working on it here in North Carolina to eradicate it from the coast here, and actually a group up in Virginia around Norfolk. They're eradicating it from around Norfolk, Virginia. So this is another one of our great successes, and it depended on a partnership with a number of local, state, and federal folks. And all these stakeholders are getting together and say, we really have to deal with this. We don't want to lose our valuable natural resources, our dune plants and our sea turtles. It was when I saw this plant growing on its own in 2003 that I realized something had to be done. But folks, I can't make anything happen. I can help guide groups through the discussion process and figure out how we can get something listed as a regulated species, etc. But it takes the will of a group of people who have something to gain or lose before you can deal with these problems. That is why I am really stressing it is so critical that we develop EDRR capacity so we don't get to the point like we are with hydrilla here in Lake Waccamaw, that we got to spend $400,000 to get rid of 600 acres of a plant that 3 years ago was probably about 20 acres of hydrilla. So we learn the hard way on these things, and I'm hoping that you'll embrace the idea that EDRR is just as important as any other invasive species management strategy, and help people to use it to their advantage so that in 50 years we don't have any more weeds than we do now from overseas. Another great opportunity in closing out here is right in front of us now in Canada. This is the first time we've ever seen Canada in kudzu in Canada. It's actually southeast of Detroit, on the north shore of Lake Erie, and in Ontario, and the folks there know about it, and we're not sure how it got there, but it's been there for 3 years, and as far as I know, it has not spread, so it's still a great opportunity to eradicate this infestation. There's a picture of where it is. If you ever fly from Atlanta up to Detroit, you cross over this lake, you're going to see this island right here. I don't know the name of it. And you're going to see this point of land right here. And I was thinking to myself as I flew over, and that's where kudzu grows right there. So it's sort of neat if you ever fly from Atlanta over Lake Erie going to Detroit, you can actually see the area. Sort of like you're looking here from this perspective. So I'm going to end it with that and say, get it organized, develop an early detection system, do surveys in natural and managed resources, submit your field data, manage your field data, tell the right people about it, assess the problem, and make a plan. So you can do this by yourself, and I don't mind talking to you about what you can do, because we really have to get everybody to embrace this idea of EDRR, or we can work with you directly on an outsourced basis through our company. So that is it for today as far as partnership development goes. What we're going to do next week is talk about how to develop and train an early detection network and a reporting system, and using those phone apps that I talked about a little while ago. And then we'll do a couple more sessions. But also, please think about joining us for our 9-part webinar series that starts this Thursday at noon on invasive species prevention. And you can talk to Steve about the types of services and products that we have, including IPC Connect. These are online smart tools to help you manage your data from your projects. IPC Logic, which actually helps you determine control recommendations. IPC Prevent, which is going to be a fill-in-the-blank type smart tool to help you develop your plan, your work plan for your EDRR projects out there.